Welcome back, WNST channel. I am all redded out. We're going to do a little Ravens and some Orioles around here this week, but certainly it's going to be a lot of hockey as we make the turn from Game 4 into Game 5 and head out to Las Vegas later in the week. This guy has been back and forth. He is a Caps historian and author and has inked books on the Capitals. And one book that you have not written, Ted Starkey, is the book where they have a 2-1 lead in a Stanley Cup final and are starting to separate themselves, in my opinion, as the better team on talent, on skill, on want, on all the things that we weren't seeing them do in Game 1. They certainly have picked the pace up here as the series has gone on. And the home cooking was something on Saturday night. I don't ever remember seeing a scene quite like that.
No, it was pretty impressive. I mean, you look at it last night, it was a sea of red. There weren't a whole lot of Vegas fans in there, obviously, with the new team and the travel, but you know, it was a very pro-Caps crowd. It was very loud. They even booed out the Golden Knights during the intros by Pat Sajak. And, you know, this team, they're playing better as the series is progressing, is what you want to see. You know, I think they're doing the little things right. I think Braden Holtby is outplaying Marc-Andre Fleury. Fleury's having a good series, but Braden's just that much better. And I think all phases of the game, the Caps are starting to clean up a little bit. You know, the only goal last night for Vegas was a gaff by Holtby, his one major mistake of the night, but other than that, they played their best game of the series and probably their most solid game since Game 7 of last series.
Well, let's go one by one here. Let's start with Ovechkin at the top. You have chronicled him from the very, very beginning, you know, portions of your book, and night by night, day by day, shift by shift in many cases, we judge him, and certainly we left Game 1. You and I were together in Vegas and said, where was Ovechkin tonight when they lost? And especially in an offensive flurry where there were a lot of goals scored. Flurry, I like how I did that. You noticed that. But since then, there's been the dominant, rough shot into the corner, you know, diving in front of pucks, as was pointed out. And, you know, it's not lost on any of us that have discussed this over the last decade that if they were ever going to win a Stanley Cup, it was not going to be a demure version of Alex Ovechkin that was going to lead to that.
Right, and I think, you know, in part of the ways, too, in their past, they've had, you know, Ovechkin always gets the blame when they lost, and obviously he's going to get a good share of the credit if they win, but, you know, he's been, as the series has gotten better, too, he's just been a better player. I mean, in Game 1, I think he looked a little bit nervous, he looked tentative. Last night, he was not. He basically, you know, his goal, he was digging in, basically just trying to score, and, you know, do whatever he could to help the team win Game 3, and, you know, he's playing much better the last two games, and, you know, I think the team really follows him. And I think a big difference, too, this year is I think he's relatively healthy compared to past playoff years. I think last year he was injured in the Toronto series and then aggravated another injury in the Pittsburgh series, so he was basically playing on one leg. And in years past, he hasn't quite been 100%, and this year I think he's motivated and I think he's relatively healthy. And, you know, he is still the force for the Caps. I mean, you know, he drives the offense, he drives the energy, he drives the crowd. And, you know, when he has a game like he did in, you know, Game 3, he's kind of hard to stop. And, you know, he's a person that Vegas has to pay attention to. And if they don't, they're going to end up paying the price.
Ted Starkey is a longtime Caps follower and historian for all things Rock the Red. You can follow him out on Twitter at Ted Starkey. That's Starkey. Also the author of Red Rising and Chasing the Dream, Life in the American Hockey League. And you can follow along with all things he does. He actually is the internet news manager at Newsday in the newspaper industry up in New York, but makes these trips back and forth. And what is it about your fanaticism of following all things Capitals and certainly them being on the brink of doing this thing that has been quite disruptive for your life over the last week and over the last 15 Aprils and Mays, right?
Yeah, no, it's been interesting. I mean, I think for me it's a little bit of the unfinished story. You know, obviously Red Rising came out a couple of years ago, and the team took a little bit of a dip right after it was published, but then, you know, obviously had 2015, you had the great upsets in the playoff, you know, basically beating the Islanders and pushing the Rangers to the brink. And then 2016 and 17, you had the President's Trophy. So you kind of knew that the core of this team was in for something special. You just didn't know when it was going to happen. And so, you know, this year it's been, you know, the last couple of years, tentatively you try to plan to see, well, maybe if they go to the finals, we'll see, what the coverage plan is, what I want to do. This year was kind of, you didn't know after the Pittsburgh series, are they going to flame out in the second round? Is it going to be, are they going to lose to Tampa Bay? And, it was kind of obviously a little bit different story this year. So you're kind of, it's a little bit more fly by the seat of your pants because you just don't know. And even for, you're trying to think about the next coming week, is it, we're going to Vegas in Game 5. Is it coming back here? Does it go back out to Vegas? You just don't know. But it's kind of, it's an unfinished story. It's, anytime a team can win a championship, the first one's always kind of the one everyone remembers, or, at least first one in a long time, with like the Red Sox in '04 and, some of these other teams. And, it's just kind of that story you want to see finished.
For you, with this happening and where we are, look, I saw a term last week, collapitals, right? That when they went down 3-2 in Tampa after winning the first two games in a rush down there and coming back here and looking like they were on the brink of elimination again. The whole collapital thing follows them around. If they're going to finish this thing off and win this thing, it's clearly going to be about Holtby this week. It's going to be about Ovechkin this week. At some point, there's going to be, and I keep saying Brett Connolly is going to be the guy that's going to, it's going to be that kind of player. Lars Eller was the star out in Vegas the other night. That's the way it works. But certainly for this team, if they are going to hoist the cup this week and you are going to write about it, what is the thesis for how this thing's changed? Like, if they win a cup, and I'll talk to you afterward about this and whatever pathway this is, or if they lose this week and wind up losing 3 games in a row and we lose game 6 in a row, who knows how this thing's going to go. But if they win this week, where would you put that credit? Where would you put that timeline to say this is what changed everything? Because it feels like Ovechkin came into it feels like he played with Langway some days. It really does.
Right, yeah, I think this playoff run is interesting. You've had about 3 points where, traditional Caps teams may have checked out. Obviously, you had the 2-0 deficit to Columbus in Game 3 in overtime, and they take a penalty. You give up a goal there, you're down 3-0, you probably don't make it out of the first round. I'd say the second series, when they were down after the second period in Game 5 against Pittsburgh, it kind of looked, the Capitals were not very good for about 5 straight periods, and it was looking like the Penguins were just going to take that series. They come back and, win out Game 5 and then beat them in Game 6. And then, obviously the Tampa series, they were terrible at Game 5 down in Tampa. And it looked very dire coming back home for Game 6. But, they basically have been resilient. And I think the biggest difference overall in the playoffs is I think Braden Holtby's outplayed every goaltender he's faced these rounds. I think goaltending is such an important part. Obviously Sergei Bobrovsky was great in the first part of that Columbus series, but, as when Grubauer came out in Game 2 and then, Holtby came in, it kind of gave the Capitals advantage. He won out. He was better than Matt Murray in round 2, and he was better than Vasilevsky in round 3. And right now he's been better than Fleury. And I think if they can win it, he's been a constant in this playoff that the Capitals don't have to score a ton of goals, but, he'll get the save when they need. Obviously, everyone was talking about the save in Game 2, but he's made a lot of good saves where, it's kind of turned the game. Goalies can give up what I like to call shoulder slumping goals, and, it's kind of a goal that you don't give up a lot of goals, but you give up a bad goal, and the players kind of know it, and they sit on the bench, and they're like, we got to get that goal back. And except for last night, he really hasn't done that. And even last night, the players rallied around to make sure they didn't get tied up. But, I think he's the main reason they win. I think, obviously, if the Capitals win, I think the guy who might get the Conn Smythe will be Ovechkin because, it's just such a great story. The storylines in the final have been terrific between both Vegas and Washington. But, Washington's biggest storyline is obviously Alex Ovechkin finally gets a chance to win.
Did you really believe they were a diminished team in the off? Ed and I spoke about this. It felt like because of the collapse, because of the loss in Game 7 last year, because of that Pittsburgh thing, and I thought Pittsburgh was a diminished team in the offseason, and we talked so much about losing Schmidt or whether they were going to lose Grubauer to this franchise, not realizing this franchise would be playing into June of 2018 in the Vegas Golden Knights, but I never felt like they were greatly diminished. I felt like they didn't need to win the President's Trophy, and they wouldn't, but I never felt like they would be I felt like they would be a harder out in April and May because of all these years of it adding up on Ovechkin and Backstrom and Holtby and Trotz and Carlson and Beagle and all the rest of these guys. I thought they would be a tough out all along, and I thought that they had a pretty interesting regular season where they weren't as dominant as they've been, but they, on certain nights, could be as good as they ever once were, right? Like the country song. And I feel like at this point, you go back and look at those Justin Williams teams or any of the Mike Green era, or the 5 minutes that Adam Oates was running around, or Dale Hunter was wearing the same fishy tie for 30 years. This is a better constructed group, certainly on the defensive side and the way they've played. And I know Kempney wasn't a big name when he was brought in, and it's not cool to love Orlov because he had his struggles earlier, but all of these guys have improved. I don't know where the weak link really is on this team right now, other than on nights when they're sort of sleepy, because on any night, this team has a third and fourth line that can cut your heart out.
Yep, and I think it's true. I'm not sure, like on paper, if this team would have been quite as good as last year's, but the big difference is, and I know Ed and I talked about this in the offseason last year, basically other teams around them didn't improve either. I mean, people act like the expansion draft only hurt the Capitals, the salary cap only hurts Capitals. You got to remember, the Penguins lost Marc-Andre Fleury, and obviously he would have made a big difference in that series this year had he still been in Pittsburgh. The Penguins lost Bonino, who always killed the Caps in the postseason. So, the Capitals, McClellan made a conscious choice to basically keep and protect the core. They signed T.J. Oshie a year ago because he knew he was part of the 6 guys that he wanted. And I think what they did is, even the guys they lost, like, the Justin Williams or the Carl Alsters or any of those guys, they were good players, but they were guys that they could plug in the lineup. And I think, the first part of this season really saw there was kind of the hangover from last year. They knew they had a great opportunity to win the Cup, and they didn't. And I think you saw a lesser emphasis on the regular season success, which I think you had kind of seen the last 2 years. They really wanted to win the President's Trophy. They really wanted to get home ice advantage. You didn't see that this year. I mean, they were definitely good enough to finish over 100 points. And I think before the season, I predicted they would finish second in the division with 105 points. I thought they would drop a little bit in the standings, but honestly, as long as you get in the playoffs, it really doesn't matter where you finish.
Well, all they were ever going to be judged on is what they did in the playoffs, and that began 5 years ago. I mean, after the first 5 collapses with Ovechkin, where first seed, 6th seed, 8th seed, it doesn't matter. Wake me up and tell me where you are in Game 3 of the first round, and if you're down 0-2, you got real problems. And this team has been through all of that. I am not shocked that they are on the brink of winning a Stanley Cup. I'm not. I mean, they've always had enough talent to do this, much like those Randall Cunningham's Eagles teams and the Cleveland Browns teams of the Brian Sipes and the Bernie Kosars. That sort of team that may never win, but you can never say that they're not good enough, that they don't have the talent to win.
And I think the big factor this season, too, is I think you look at it, except for the Columbus series, the Capitals have pretty much been underdogs every round. And I think I've always had a thought that the Capitals in the past years have just not dealt with the pressure very well. And I think what happens is, they kind of think about things too much. They don't simplify their game. And this year, they were probably even with Columbus in terms of, who people thought they would win. They maybe were slightly favored, but, it was against Tortorella, who had tormented them with the Rangers. Then the Penguins series, hardly anyone thought they were going to beat the Penguins. And so basically the Penguins had all the pressure dumped on them. The Caps were kind of there, and, the Caps kind of thrived on that. And then against Tampa Bay, I think one panel had 14 people, only 2 picked the Caps. Tampa kind of collapsed under pressure. I mean, that might be the interesting thing with this series is, if they do take Game 4 and up 3-1, do you start thinking about it? Maybe the pressure will be a little bit on them more than they've seen, but...
Well, they've done everything except blow a 3-1 lead in the Stanley Cup Finals, right? Like, literally, as a franchise, if you're talking about Bill Buckner with the Red Sox, right? I mean, the Cubs and, everything that happened with Moises Alou and Steve Bartman, right? I mean, if the Capitals were to do this, it would be, Ovechkin scoring an own goal in Game 7 to lose the Stanley, you know what I mean? That's the narrative the naysayers want to write, and that's been the narrative of the franchise for 45 years. That's not the narrative right now, and certainly this will be the week where Ovechkin, Holtby, Backstrom, Trotz, they all get to write a new narrative this week.
Exactly, and I think, they've got a lot more confidence this year, too, because you can definitely tell, like we were talking about earlier, about these moments they could have just collapsed. They didn't. They kind of dug deep and got themselves out of holes.
Well, 3-2 Tampa was a hell of a hole. I mean, especially the way they played down there. You and I sat together. They come back home, they're up 2-0, and then they became the Capitals again, literally.
Yep, and, as I said, there could have been a couple points where you just think, like, oh, this is it. Well, heck, even after Game 1 of the Columbus series, the Washington Post is ready to bury them already, saying, here we go again. And, you got to remember, too, most times, the only exceptions to the rule are probably the Kings of when the playoffs is just a cakewalk. They had the Kings had the 1 year where they really never faced any adversity. But for the most part, if you win the Stanley Cup, you're still probably going to have to win a Game 7. You're still going to have to face some adversity, and you have to fight through it. And the Caps have proven they can do that. And I'm curious to see how this series goes because obviously Vegas has been such a great story, but kind of in the back of your mind, you kind of wonder, when does this team run out of gas? Because, you've kind of been waiting for that other shoe to drop in the last 3 rounds, and they've been terrific. But at the same time, it's, they're still an expansion team. They're
outmanned, dude. That's the first thing I talked to Eddie about, and I know you're sitting 2 away from me. You haven't talked about it. Boy, the Capitals just have better players than this team. And that's not to say that the sum of the parts, that the Caps can't lose this week and things can't go wrong. And certainly in Game 1, Vegas kept coming at them, and I'm sure they'll do that on Thursday when they get out there into the desert again. But the Capitals are a better team. They have better players. They have better everything, quite frankly. Now, whether that plays out this week, it would be a massive, massive disappointment if some way the Capitals wind up losing 3 out of the next 4 games to this outfit, for me.
Yeah, I think, the thing with Vegas is that they are a system team. I mean, heck, you could look at Nate Schmidt. Nate Schmidt was a healthy scratch down the stretch last year until the playoffs, and he's their top defenseman. I think the Capitals have a pretty good team. I think they're getting... The one thing they're matching, too, with Vegas is they're getting production from all 4 lines, which I don't think they got against Winnipeg, San Jose, or Los Angeles. I think the Capitals, they can beat you with the Ovechkins, but, obviously Devontae Smith-Pelly didn't have a great game until the 3rd period last night, but he still scored the decisive goal. I mean, the Vegas got the fluke goal within 1, and they were pressing, and then DSP scored to, basically give them the Game 3 win. And I think you're seeing that because that top end of the talent is a little bit better than Vegas, and I also think, the goaltending is a difference. They're just a little bit deeper, and, they are in control. I think if you're Vegas, you have to kind of hope you can get your balance back in the series, because I think if you go down 3-1 to Washington, maybe you win that Game 5 in Vegas, but it would be very tough to beat the Capitals 3 games in a row.
Well, Tampa did it last series, and I thought the same thing. I thought it would be very difficult to beat them 4 games in a row, and as it turned out, Tampa didn't sniff them in 6 and 7. Ted Starkey is our guest. He is the author of Red Rising. You can find that out on Twitter and Amazon and anywhere if you want some of the background to the Capital story. Incidentally, the Red Rising is the background a lot of George McVie, who's also built Vegas. It's amazing the way that works, right?
It is. I mean, he did a terrific job. I think, obviously, I don't think even he expected this team would do what they did. I think, obviously he put a heavy emphasis on speed, and he brought in Gerard Gallant, and, Gallant used to be the coach with Florida, and he did a terrific job down there of just kind of trying to place a system. And he got, I remember I talked to the Golden Knights play-by-play person about this earlier this year, Dan Duva, and he basically said that they put a premium on guys that would buy in the locker room and kind of, plug in. You're not going to score 30 goals, but you'll be playing in the system. We'll be successful. And, they got off to a great start, and it just never let in. They had a lot of confidence. They got a lot of great performances from individuals, but overall they're a pretty good team. And, he did a good job. And the thing with Vegas is, even if they lose this series, they're going to have a lot of draft picks over the summer because of all the expansion trades they made, and they're going to have a lot of cap room. They can go out and get and Eric Carlson from Ottawa. They can go try to sign John Tavares or even John Carlson from the Caps, and they'll be a force for a while because they're a pretty deep team and they can add some parts.
He is Ted Starkey, and the book is out there, the internet is out there, the Twitter is out there. He is out there with us at All Things Caps all week long. He will be monitoring the Stanley Cup Finals along with Ed Frankovic. You can find me out in the Toyota.com audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn Radio app. We do come in crystal clear from anywhere in the world. Our morning newspaper delivers digitally directly to your email inbox. You can sign up at WNST.net. It's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, the lunk alarm, and they're always judgment-free at Planet Fitness. There's one near you. Also, we're back racing at Laurel again. The Laurel entries up on the front of WNST.net, as well as in the aforementioned morning newspaper when you sign up. We'll be talking more about Laurel and all the good stuff there on the backside of a big, big victory by Justify in Preakness 2 weeks ago. We got the Belmont running this week. We'll do some horse racing here later on in the week as I get out to Las Vegas for Game 5 later on as well. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. And don't forget, any breaking news, including I saw the Manny Machado's Yankees jerseys popping up at Camden Yards over the weekend. If Manny Machado is dealt anywhere, you'll get it first on the WNST text service. That is our breaking news service. It's the best we do, even our competitors use. I found that out over the weekend as well. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis Colatzos will be here on Thursday, ready to talk Cup. I'll be joining him from Las Vegas before Game 5 on Thursday, right around 4:15 Eastern Time here. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Taos in Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.